You can't be cutting corners. There's certain rules you got to follow for it to work well. If you follow these rules, I promise you it will work. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Thursday, May 2nd here in South Georgia, and on today's video we're going to talk about why some of our tomato plants are struggling already, and then we're going to get our trellis set up for our determinate tomatoes, show you how we do something called the Florida weave. So last week when we were out here at the tomato plot, we gave all our plants some of that Agri-Thrive fruit and flowers, some of that Bug Hut plant booster. We healed the plants, and I told you once we healed them, they would pop. So let's take a look at what some of these roadster plants looked like last week. And here's what they look like now. These things have almost doubled in size in just a week after feeding them and giving them a nice healing. So the roadsters look great. That's a very fast maturing variety. It always outpaces the others. Our red snappers here are looking really, really good too. And this BHN gold variety that we've never grown before is looking nice as well. Happy with how those are looking. Now this one plant here is one that we replaced last week. Good bit of transplant shock with that one, but I think it's about to turn the corner. The top leaves look nice and green, so hopefully that one will pick up pretty soon. And then over here in the second row, we've got our indeterminates, mostly heirloom, a couple hybrids. We fed these and healed these last week. They're looking pretty good for the most part. Already added our cages around those to support those plants. And this is the time of year when we usually start getting a lot of messages and emails, people sending pictures wanting to know what's wrong with their tomato plants. They'll send a picture of a tomato plant with the leaves all curled up like this oxheart plant here is. I want to know what's wrong with it, what can I do to save it? So sometimes there are things you can do to help, but sometimes there's nothing you can do. And that's one reason why I always recommend planting more tomato plants than you think you're going to need. Play the volume game. That way, if you do have a few plants that kind of go downhill fast, at least you'll have some left hanging around. In the case of that oxheart plant there, we know it's not anything viral. It's too early for tomatoes to be getting viruses around here. Now we do have a good bit of viral pressure, but it's not quite that time yet. We know it's not water because it's getting the same amount of water that all the other plants in those other two rows are, and they seem happy. We know it's not fertility for those same reasons. It's gotten the same amount of fertilizer as everything else. So what is it? Well, it's just heat stress. Some varieties can hang down here, some varieties can't. Another thing that may have contributed to that is the fact that that plant was a little bigger than the others when we healed them. I did prune that one just a little bit more than some of the others, and it seems pruning down here has a negative effect sometimes. The more leaves we have, the more that seems to kind of shade and protect the plant. We prune it too much, they just burn up. Now one thing we could do that I'm not going to do now, but I'm not past doing, is use some shade cloth. We could put a shade cloth over that entire row there, and that would probably help out some of those varieties. They're not as well adapted to the South Georgia heat. Now one thing you might be wondering is, why is our climate down here so tough on some of these tomato varieties? It's not like we live in the hottest place on earth, but when you combine our heat with our humidity, it does make it tough on a lot of these older tomato varieties. I'll tell you a funny story that kind of parallels into what we're talking about with these tomatoes. So in college, I worked for a country club in Valdosta, which is about an hour away from here, worked on the maintenance crew. And in the summer, sometimes we would have these interns come in from out of state. They would be going to college, getting their turf grass management degree or something like that, and they would come do an internship with us. Well, one summer we had this guy from Texas come in. He was from South Texas, way down there, so he was used to working in way hotter temperatures than what we had in Valdosta. And I remember his first few days very well. Me and a whole crew of guys were spreading pine straw all day for a week straight. And those first few days, man, he was sucking hind. Well, I better not say that. Let's just say he was struggling, okay? He was really, really struggling. And he said, man, I thought it was hot in Texas, but over here, it's just like you can't breathe out here. So it took him quite a while to adapt to our climate down here, and some of these tomato varieties just never do adapt. And that's why I think variety selection is one of the most important pieces to the tomato growing puzzle or equation. You got to pick the varieties that are going to do well in your climate. Yeah, you can plant a few of these heirlooms, have a little fun with them, but don't, put all your eggs in that basket. Grow you some nice heat tolerant varieties if you live in a hot area, something that you can count on. So we know we can count on these determinate varieties in this first row, and today we need to get our Florida weave trellis started before these things get too big and bushy. So the Florida weave trellis is the same trellis that most of the commercial tomato growers around here use. They do it a little bit different. They're growing on plastic. They tend to use a lot of wooden stakes, whereas I use metal stakes, but it's pretty much the same concept. Now, we do from year to year get people saying they tried the Florida weave and they hated it, didn't work for them. And usually I find out, once I'm talking to them a little bit, that it's because they cut a few corners. With the Florida weave, you can't be cutting corners. There's certain rules you got to follow for it to work well. If you follow these rules, I promise you it will work. So rule number one, get you some short metal T-posts. I have used wooden posts in the past successfully. I've also had years where those wooden posts snapped and I had a mess. So I'm all metal now. A short T-post is nice for this. You don't want a real tall one. A 4 or 5 foot T-post is going to work best. A lot easier to weave around these than a taller one. Rule number two, use a commercial grade poly twine. Don't use a cotton twine because it will stretch and you'll end up with a mess on your hands. You need a nice strong twine that won't stretch. We use these boxes right here that we get off Amazon. I think these are 20 bucks or so, have a mile of twine inside. These will last you a long time and you can use them for a lot of different things. If I can remember, I'll put a link below in the comments where you can get a box of this. I also put a link to those cages, just as a heads up. Have your pocketbook ready if you want to get some of those cages. They're nice, they're durable, they'll last forever, but they are really expensive. Rule number three, don't put more than 4 plants between your posts. You can do 2 plants between the posts, you can do 3 plants between the posts, you can do 4 plants between the posts. But if you go more than that, then you're going to get some leaning and sagging going on when those plants get full grown. Number 4, you got to keep the string really tight when you're doing the Florida weave. All the way up the row and all the way back down the row. That's the reason I really like this box of string here. I can put this on my belt loop. I can use one hand to guide the string and the other hand to keep the string really tight. You want to keep that string so tight that it almost burns your hands when you're doing the Florida weave. Now, if you've got sissy hands, you might need to wear gloves for this. If you've got seasoned gardener hands, you should be all right. And then number 5, you got to stay on top of things, and you're going to need to add a new line of string pretty much every week. Assuming you've got good soil fertility and your tomato plants are growing like these tomato plants are, expect to go out there at least once a week and add a new line of string. If you miss a week, those plants are going to get big and it's going to be hard to run your next line of string. So stay on top of it. You can't have too many lines of string, but if you don't have enough, you can run into some problems. So now let me show you how we do it. I've already got my T-posts laid out. Going to use 5 T-posts on this 30-foot row with 14 tomato plants. Down here on this end of the row, we're doing 4 plants between each set of posts. Up here on this end of the row, we're using 3 plants, or doing 3 plants between each set of posts, just the way the math worked out. And I know these roadster plants are going to get a little bit bigger, so I do 3 between those posts and 4 with these other varieties. All right, so we got all our posts in the ground there, being very careful not to puncture our drip tape. I like to go ahead and drive those 5-foot tall T-posts about a foot in the ground. Get them shorter where it's easier to do the weave around these. To drive them that far in the ground usually takes about 10 good licks with the T-post driver. Unless you got sissy arms, probably gonna take you more. So now we're ready to run some string. Now once I get that box of twine on my belt and get going here, I can't move the camera. So I'll show you what it looks like on one end of the row, and then you'll see me as I come back. All right, so I got my box of twine on my belt. You might not can see it because it's over here on my left side. And this first line of string, I'm gonna run relatively low. So we'll measure it up on this plant. Should be about right there. So we're gonna go ahead tie this off. So with this first line of string, we want to try and get that string right up against the main stem of the plant if we can. As these plants grow and get really bushy, that becomes a little more tough. But with the first line of string, we want to get it right close there. So we go on this side of this plant and then on this side of this plant, and we just weave through the plants. When we get to a post, we wrap the string around the post 2 or 3 times and keep going. And now we're coming back, so we're going on the other side of the plant. So we get that twine kind of sandwiching that tomato plant. We're going to get down here and we're going to tie it off. And so that's what it should look like when it's done right. You got each plant sandwiched between that twine, going to keep it from moving front to back and side to side. And so if you're growing more than 5 or 6 determinate tomato plants, this is a great trellising system, cheap and easy way to keep those plants upright. And if you follow all 5 of my rules, you should be good to go. Now don't come at me later in the year telling me how sorry the Florida weave is if you didn't follow all 5 of my rules. You got to do all those 5 things, and if you do, those plants will be nice and standing tall for you. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you're an experienced Florida weaver like myself, let me know in the comments below if you've got any additional tips that you'd like to share with the people watching. If you want to see what this Florida weave trellis looks like with 4 or 5 lines of string on it with bigger tomato plants, watch this video. You can see how our tomato plants looked last year with this same trellis. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.